we're on DAF Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, and we are, it's about the 7th or 8th line. We're continuing along about how the great sages used to show proper honor to Shabbos. Rabbi Chanina mi'ate v'koi apanya demali shabta. Rabbi Chanina used to wrap himself in his special Shabbos garment and would stand on Shabbos afternoon and he would say, Omar, doesn't say who he said this to, but he's probably said it either to his family or to his students. He would say, Bo'u v'neitze likras Shabbos hamalka. Let us go out to greet the Shabbos queen. And of course, this was later, even though this originates in the Gemara, we know that there was a formulation of this in a formal Kabbalah Shabbos service that was done by the Arizal in Sfas. You know, it was very, it's very well known, the history of this. Rabbi Yanai lovish monei b'malei Shabbos v'omar bo'u chala bo'i chala. Rabbi Yanai used to wear his special Shabbos clothes on Erev Shabbos, and he would say, enter queen, enter queen. Rabba bar Avhuna ikla lebe Rabba bar Av Nachman krivule tasavi tachayi. That Rabba bar Avhuna once came, he was the Rebbe, and he came to the house of Rabba bar Av Nachman, and he came as an unannounced guest for Shabbos. And they bring out for him 3 sa'as of these griddle cakes that were coated with fat or some kind of shortening, which was considered to be a delicacy. So Amarle mihava yadiisum da asina. So he said to them, how did you know that I was coming for a visit, that you knew to bake these special delicacies? Amrule miadifas lan mina. They said back to him, you're not any better than us. In other words, this is our regular Shabbos delicacy. We always make delicacies for Shabbos. And so even if you hadn't come, this is what we would have had. So this is a demonstration about how people have to have special foods for Shabbos, even if they're not having chashuva guests. Rabbi Abba Zoban betleiser istiri pshiti bisra mitleiser tavachi umashlim lahu at sinora didasha ve'omer lahu ashur chaya. So, or ashur haya, excuse me. So, Rabbi Abba, Rashi gives a couple of different explanations. I'll just go with the second explanation that he gives. He says that he would spend a certain amount of money, 13 isture pshiti, and he would use that money to go to 13 different butchers on Erev Shabbos. He would buy their finest cuts of meat, and he would bring it back to his house, and without allowing himself to come in and unload his packages, he would call to his servants from the front door, and say, come on guys, bring in the packages, bring in the packages. You know, he was so excited and so enthusiastic about preparing for Shabbos that this is what he used to do. Rebbe Avahu, you know, just imagine a Rebbe going shopping on Shabbos. He goes to Sobeys, then he goes to My Zaydi's, and then he goes to this one and that one. He goes to all the different places, and he's got all of these packages that he's holding in his hand. And he says to the people working in his house, come on, chop a package, grab it, come on in.
Yeah, no car, you got to carry it all.
And he's got, well, he might have had a donkey or something, but you're right, it was a big schlep. Probably took him the whole day. Rabbi Avohu Havayasiv Atachtaka Deshina Umoshif Nura. Rabbi Avohu was a very wealthy man, and he used to have a special folding chair made out of some kind of fine ivory. And so he would sit by the fire and fan the flame to prepare it for Shabbos. Rav Anan Lavish Gunda, that Rav Anan wore a special garment called the Gunda, which was not special. Actually, it was like a dirty apron that he would wear to prepare the Shabbos meals. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael begadim shabishel bahen kedera l'rabo al yimzog bahen kos l'rabo. Rabbi Yishmael taught that the clothing that you wear to cook in the kitchen for your master should not be the same clothes that you wear when you're acting as the butler and you're serving your master. You wear dirty clothes in the kitchen as the chef, and then when you come out, you have to put on nice, white, clean clothing. So therefore, on Erev Shabbos, he wore his dirty work clothes because he was working assiduously in the kitchen to cook and to bake and all that stuff. You see, we think our wives are supposed to do this job. Look, it's the rabbis themselves who are doing all the cooking and the preparing because they wanted to show their love for Shabbos. And then when Shabbos came, then he would change his clothes. Rav Safra Machrich Reisha. Rav Safra, his preparation for Shabbos is that whenever there was a head of an animal that they would serve on Shabbos, he would singe the hairs to make it more palatable. Rava Molach Shibuta. Rava used to salt the Shibuta fish. And Rav Huna Madlik Shragi. Rav Huna would light the candles. Rav Papa Gadil Psilta. Rav Papa prepared the wicks. Rav Chizda Porim Silka. Rav Chizda used to cut the beets. Rabba V'Rav Yosef Mitzal Chitzivi. They would prepare, I guess, the firewood. And Rav Zera Mitzases Tsisusi. He would prepare the little kindling twigs in order to ignite the flame. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Mekaseh V'Ayil Mekaseh V'Nafik. He was constantly on Erev Shabbos schlepping and bringing in, schlepping and bringing out. The Gemara doesn't say exactly what it is, but it was just like he kept himself very busy schlepping in and schlepping out of his house all the different kinds of packages that were necessary in order to properly prepare for Shabbos. So Amar Ilu Mikala in Li Rabbi Ami V'Rabbi Asi Milo Machtifna Kamayu. He said to himself, he said, look, if my Rebbes, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, were coming to visit me, would I not be schlepping for them? So how can I not schlep for the Shabbos queen? V'ika da Amri Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi mekasvi v'ayli mekasvi v'nafski. Some say that the story was with Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, that they used to schlep in and schlep out. And Amri ilu iklol on Rabbi Yochanan milo mekasvinon kamei. And their statement was that if Rabbi Yochanan was visiting us, would we not do the same? And therefore, how could we not do this for Shabbos? Yosef Moker Shabi. There was once a man by the name of Yosef, the one who honored Shabbos. That was his name. And so let's learn a story about Yosef Moker Shabi. It's a famous story. There was a Gentile in his neighborhood who was quite wealthy. So a Chaldean fortune teller, these Chaldean fortune tellers told him that eventually all of your estate will fall into the hands of Yosef Moker Shabi. Ozal Zavninhu Lakulu Nichsi, Zavin Behu Marganisa Osva Bisayane. That he's figured, you know what? I'll prevent this Yosef Moker Shabbos from getting a hold of my assets. So he went ahead and he liquidated his estate and purchased a very precious Marganisa is either a pearl or a gem. It depends on the context. And he purchased, they translate as jewel or pearl. I don't know. Pearl. Yeah, it's usually a pearl, but sometimes I've seen it translated as jewel. But anyway, he bought a very expensive pearl. He placed it, embedded it in his turban, and decided that will be the way. I'll always keep it on me so no one will be able to take it from me. So Bahadi Taka Mavara Afrechezika Shadja B'maya. So as he was walking across a bridge, a huge gust of wind came along, blew off his turban and blew it into the water. So Bale Kavra Askuha Aisuha Apanya Demale Shabta. A fish swallowed the pearl, or maybe the whole turban, I don't know, and the fisherman caught this fish Friday afternoon. Of course, most people had already finished their Shabbos shopping, so they said, Amri man zavin ki hashta, they said, who's going to buy a fish of this size so soon before Shabbos? So Amri lahu zili amtiyuhu lebe Yosef mokir shabi derogel dezavin. They said, we know, perfect guy who'll buy this. Anytime you have something good, no matter how close to Shabbos it is, Yosef Moker Shabi will always buy it. So they brought it to him, Amtiyu ani halei zavne, and he taka bought it. So quickly, been preparing for the final few minutes before Shabbos, Kare and Ashkach Bey Marganisa. So he cuts open the fish and finds the pearl, and Zavne Betleser Elisa de Dinri de Dahava. And he sells it for 13 talents of gold, or gold dinners. Pagabe Hahusaba Omar Mandi Yosef Shabta Pare Shabta. And an elderly man came over to him with wise knowledge and said to him, he who lends money to Shabbos, Shabbos will pay that person back. You've spent so much on showing how beloved Shabbos is to you, Shabbos will surely pay you back in spades. Right? So there you go. Bo'amine Rami Merebbe Yishmol Berebbe Yossi. Ashirim Sheberetz Yisrael B'mahin Zochin. The question that was asked of Rabbi Yishmael from Rebbe was, the wealthy people in Eretz Yisrael, what did they do to deserve such wealth? He said because they tithe regularly their produce, because Eretz Yisrael there's a mitzvah of agricultural tithe. So because they tithe, the Torah says aser to aser, a double language of tithing, which can also be read as aser bishvil shetis asher, tithe so that you will become wealthy. If a person is meticulous in tithing, he'll become wealthy. Fine. So that explains the Ashirim in Eretz Yisrael. Shebebavel b'mahin zachin. The wealthy people in Bavel, what did they do to deserve to become wealthy? There's no agricultural tithe. So what did they do? Amar lei b'shvil shemachabden es haTorah, because they show proper honor to Torah, because there were yeshivas in Bavel, and so by supporting the yeshivas and supporting the rabbis, they merited to have great wealth. Okay, so then the question became, so now what about if you live in the Gola, in the diaspora, and you don't live in a yeshiva community? What do the wealthy people out in Yehupitzville, what did they do to deserve to become so wealthy? So Amar lei bishvil shemachabden es haShabbos, because they show proper honor to the Sabbath. The Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba pam echas nisarachti esel balabayis beludkia. As the story goes, Rabbi Chia once said, I once was a guest by a balabas in Ludkia, which was not a great Torah center. Behiviu lefan of shulchan shel zahav mashvi shisha asar b'nei adam, that they brought out a table made out of gold that could only be carried by 16 men. There were 16 chains of silver that were embedded in it. And there were all different kinds of cups and trays and plates and troughs that were attached to this table. And on all of the trays and utensils were all different kinds of food and sweets and fragrances. And their practice was that when they would put all the food down in front of the guests, they would say, Lashem haaretz umloa, Hashem is the owner of the earth, because they hadn't yet made a bracha, so they wanted to acknowledge that all of this belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After they made the bracha and they ate, they would recite the pasuk, Hashemayim Lashem, V'haaretz nasan livnei adam, that Hashem owns the heavens, but He gave the earth to mankind, because Hashem gave us this gift of all of this wonderful food. So Amarti lo bini b'mezachisa lekach. So I said to the balabas, I said, my son, what did you do in your life to deserve to have such great wealth? So Amar li katzav hayisi umikol behema shahisa noe amarti zu tehei l'shabbos. That I used to be a butcher, and anytime I would get a choice cut of meat, I wouldn't sell it to my customers. I would put it aside and say, this will be for my Shabbos. And so, Amarti lo, Ashrecha shezachisa, ubarach hamakom shezichecha lekach. So I said back to him, fortunate are you to have merited this blessing, and blessed is Hashem who gave you the blessing. Amar le kesel Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, mipnei ma tavshel shel Shabbos reicho nodeh. Another famous interchange. The Caesar, a Gentile Caesar, says once to Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, why is it that when you walk into a Jewish home on Friday night, or on Erev Shabbos, there's a fragrance that is so pungent and so aromatic and so delicious smelling? I've never smelled something as delicious as walking into a Jewish home on Friday. So what is it? What is that food that you're cooking? So Amar lo, Tavlin echad yeshlanu v'Shabbos shemo, shana matilin l'socho v'reicho nodev. He said to him, we have a certain spice. It's called Shabbos. And when you put it in the food, it gives off such an aromatic fragrance. Amar lo, tein lanu heimenu. So the Caesar said, well, can you share that spice with us? So Amar lo, kol ha-meshamer es ha-Shabbos moelo, v'shena meshaber es ha-Shabbos eno moelo. So he says, I'm sorry, Caesar. Only someone who's Sabbath observant can have the spice. If you don't observe the Sabbath, you'll never have the spice. It won't work for you. The spice won't work for you. Amalei reish galusa l'Rav Hamnuna, mai dichsiv. So therefore, you can make a cholent. When guys made cholent in the dorm on a Monday night, it never tasted like a real cholent. It just doesn't work. Doesn't work. So why bother? Okay. Amalei reish galusa l'Rav Hamnuna, mai dichsiv v'likdosh Hashem mechubad. There's a pasuk. It's a long pasuk. It's in Yeshaya, which talks about honoring the Sabbath. And there's an additional phrase in that pasuk that says, that which is holy for Hashem is honored. And that phrase is totally superfluous. So therefore the Gemara concludes that that part is not referring to Shabbos, but rather Amar Lei Ze Yom HaKippurim, She'ein Bo Lo Achila V'Lo Shasiya. It refers to another holy day that is like Shabbos, which is Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is also called Sabbath. But the thing about Yom Kippur is that you also have to show honor, even though there's no eating and drinking on Yom Kippur, you have to nevertheless honor it. So Amar Torah Kabdehu B'Ksus Nikiya. And therefore, how do you honor Yom Kippur? You honor it by wearing nice, clean clothes. And that's how you honor Yom Kippur. Even though you can't honor it with nice food, because you can't eat, but you still honor it with nice clothes. V'chi badato. And then the pasuk continues, and it says V'chi badato, which can't be referring to Yom Kippur anymore, because it already said the word kavod in reference to Yom Kippur. So this is a reference going back to Shabbos. Rav Omar lahaktim u'shmuel Omar la'acher. And it can't be talking about providing good food for Shabbos, because that's already mentioned previously in the pasuk V'his anagta, that you shall provide karas l'Shabbos oneg. You have to declare oneg for Shabbos, so that's good food and good drink. So what does the pasuk mean when it says honor the Shabbos? It means that even with the good food, you have to show additional honor, so that either you make the meal earlier than you would normally eat during the week, or you make the meal later than you normally would. It's a machlokus between Rav and Shmuel. So Amru Lei b'nei Rav Papa bar Abba Rav Papa kagon anan d'shchiach lan bisra v'chamar kol yoma b'mai nishnayeh. And the Gemara illustrates this by saying a story by the children of Rav Papa. Rav Papa was wealthy. He used to have meat and wine on his table every day of the week. And so his children asked him, how are we supposed to distinguish the Shabbos meal from any other meal during the week if we have the opportunity to eat meat the rest of the week? This is, of course, relevant to people in the Western world today. People can have chicken and beef any day of the week. Thank God. It's not like the old days when you had gribbinus at the best for Shabbos, and you had fillers the rest of the week. So anyway, so he says, Amar lahu iraglisu lagdume achruha iragilisu lachruha agdumua. And he said back to them, look, if you normally eat the meal early, then have the Shabbos meal a little bit later to show that it's different. And if you normally eat later, have the Shabbos meal earlier to show that it's different. Rav Sheishis b'kita mosiv l'hu l'rabbanan heicha dematya shimsha b'sisfa mosiv l'hu l'rabbanan heicha dematya tula ki heichi dilakumu haya. So the Gemara explains, Rashi explains that Rav Sheishis was blind, and Rav Sheishis his students would gather around him on Shabbos to hear words of Torah. But he felt bad. He didn't want his students to spend their whole day learning Torah on Shabbos, because he knew that there was a mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos. He wanted his students to break up and to go to their homes and to have their Shabbos meal. So he would deliberately have his students, because he was blind and he couldn't see the sun, in the summer months he would have his students sit in the place where when it got too hot in the middle of the day, the sun would beat down upon them, and that would cause them to disperse earlier because they didn't want to sit in the hot sun. And in the winter, he would have them sit in a place where the shade would come at some point in the day, and it would be too chilly, and that would cause them to disperse and go home more quickly. Rabbi Zera Mahader Azuzi Zuzi de Rabbana. Rabbi Zera used to go, and when he would find rabbis learning Bechavrusa in the Beis Medrash on Shabbos, he would say, Amar lahu b'matusa minaychu lo sichal lelunei. He would say to them, excuse me, Rabbi Isai, I don't mean to take you away from Talmud Torah, but it's very important that you go home now so that you can have Oneg Shabbos with your families and have the Shabbos meal. So that even taking time to study Torah, it has to be, you have to take away time to study Torah in order to be Machabed Shabbos. Amar Rava v'tema Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, afilu yachid hamispalel be'erev Shabbos tzarach lomar vayichulu. So Rava says, and some say it's Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that even a private individual who is davening Friday night in privacy of his own home still has to say vayichulu in his prayers. Because when you say vayichulu, you're bearing testimony that Hashem created heaven and earth. But it's more than that. The Omer Rav Hamnuna kol hamispalel be'erev Shabbos v'omer vayichulu ma'aleh alav hakasav kilu nasa shutef lahakadosh baruch hu v'ma'isa bereishis. If you say vayichulu, it's as if God attributes it as if you're his partner in the act of creation. Shene'amar vayichulu al tikri vayichulu ela vayichalu. Do not read the pasuk as vayichulu, that the work was completed, but rather vayichalu, they completed. Meaning that Hashem says, it's as if you and I completed creation together. Every time I bear testimony that Hashem created the world, I'm giving substance to the purpose. Why did Hashem create the world? He created the world so that man could acknowledge the Creator. So every time I acknowledge the Creator and His creations, I'm helping give substance to the creation, and therefore I'm a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So and to show that speech is a form of creation. Amar Rabbi Elazar minayin shahadibur kemaisa. How do you know that speech is as substantive as action, as creation? Shenamar bidvar Hashem shemaim nasu, as it says that through God's speech the world was created. And if God could speak and give substance to the world, so too our speech gives substance and purpose and meaning and the sense of permanence to the world. Amar Rav Chizda Amar Mar Ukva Kol Hamispalal Be'erev Shabbos V'Amar Vayechulu Shnei Malachi Hashareis Hamalavin Lo La'adam Manichin Yedein Al Rosho V'Amrim Lo V'Sar Avoneich V'Chatosech Techupar. That when a person davens Friday night and he says Vayechulu, the two ministering angels who always accompany a person place their hands over his head and they say to him the pasuk that your sin shall be removed and your iniquity shall be atoned. Tanya Reb Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer Shnei Malachi Hashareis Melavin Ola Adam Be'erev Shabbos Mibeis HaKnesses LeBeisos. The famous Gemara says that two ministering angels escort a person home on Friday evening from the synagogue back to his house. Echad Tov ve'echad Ra. One's a good angel and one's a bad angel. V'cheshabala Beiso u'matza ner daluk v'shulchan aruch u'mitasa mutza'as. If a person comes home Friday night and he finds the table set and the candles lit and the beds all made and the house is in order, so Malach Tov Omer Yehi Ratzon Shetehei L'Shabbos Acheres Kach U'Malach Ra Ona Amen Bal Korcho. Then the good angel says, may it be the will, the Hashem's will, that it be next Shabbos the exact same way, and the bad angel is forced to answer Amen. The Imlav Malach Ra Omer Yehi Ratzon Shetehei L'Shabbos Acheres Kach U'Malach Tov Ona Amen Bal Karcho. But if he comes home and the table is not set and the candles are not lit and the beds are not made and the house is in disarray, so then the bad angel says, may it be so that next Shabbos should be exactly the same way, and the good angel is forced to answer Amen. Of course, this Gemara requires further analysis, which we don't have time for. But the fact of the matter is that what the Gemara is reflecting upon is it all depends upon what kind of habits you get into. If you get into the habit of making Shabbos beautiful, then it'll become second nature and you'll be able to do it for all future Shabbosos. But once you fall into a rut of disarray and chaos in your life and you don't make a nice Shabbos, so then the chances are that it's going to continue that way as well. Don't think that you can let one Shabbos lapse. It won't work. Amar Rabbi Elazar la'olam yasader adam shulchano be'erev Shabbos afal pi she'en tzarech elo lekizayis. A person, even if you're living by yourself, right? You don't need, all you need is a little kazayas of food because you're not planning to eat very much. You should still have a nicely, beautifully set table. Even though you're not having guests, and even though you're eating alone, you should still always have a beautifully set table, not for yourself, not for your guests, but for Shabbos. And now Rabbi Chanina gives us a new halacha, which is codified in a siman in Shulchan Aruch. I think it's siman shin in Shulchan Aruch, which is a whole siman just on Malava Malka. The poskim say that Malava Malka is a mitzvah. It's not as obligatory as Shalosh Seudos on Shabbos, but it still occupies prominence in its importance of doing every Motzoi Shabbos. That a person should have a set table, he should sit down like a mensch, and even though he's only going to be eating a kazayis, but he should have something nice and say, this is L'chavot Malava Malka.
Does that include going out for pizza Saturday night?
You get to it in just a second. That's a great question. Chamin b'motzoi Shabbos melugma, pascham b'motzoi Shabbos melugma. So the Gemara says that hot water or hot beverages on Motzoi Shabbos is therapeutic, and hot bread on Motzoi Shabbos is therapeutic. Now, why is that? It's therapeutic because you're demonstrating these are foods that you could not have had left over from Shabbos. You have to prepare them fresh. Freshly baked bread and freshly heated beverages. Those are things that you should demonstrate that now that Shabbos is over, you're demarcating in your Malava Malka between between Kodesh and Chol, and that's part of the achievement of a Malava Malka. So that's why I've said, like Rav Gedalia just pointed out, pizza is Paschama. Pizza is the fulfillment, the quintessential fulfillment of a Malava Malka. Have a slice of pizza and you do a great mitzvah. Rabbi Avohu Hava Avdin Lei, but you should say, right? You should say, this is L'Chavid David Melech Yisrael, the Suda of David Melech Yisrael. It's the meal of King David. This is known as a Malava Malka, and L'Chavid L'Shem Malava Malka. You should say when you're biting into your slice, and wash and bench. Rabbi Avohu Hava Avdin Lei Bafuke Shabta Ikla Tilsa. Rabbi Avohu every Motzai Shabbos would slaughter a fresh calf, and he did that because Hava Achel Minei Kul Yisa, just to be able to eat a kidney. That was, I guess, he loved kidney, and he would eat just the kidney of the calf, and the calf was left over. I don't think he discarded it, but it was left over for the rest of the week. And Ki Gadol Avimi Berei, when his son Avimi became older, Amarle Lamalach La'avsudi Kulei Hai Nishbo Kul Yisa Mimali Shabta. He says, Father, why are you shechting a whole calf just to be able to have the fresh kidney Motzai Shabbos? Why don't you just, you know you're going to have a calf for Shabbos, for you and your guests. Let's just leave over a kidney from the calf that you shecht on Erev Shabbos, and we'll save that for Malava Malka. We'll save a lot of money. We don't have to shecht the second calf every Motzai Shabbos. So father said, okay, fine, we'll listen to you. Shavkuhu va'asa aryeh achle. And a lion came that night and mauled and ate one of the calves in his herd, or in his flock, whatever it is.
He didn't save anything.
And so he didn't save anything. That was a lesson, min hashamayim, that, you have to show proper covet to Malava Malka as well. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol ha'ona amen yehi shmei Rabba mevorach b'chol kocho, korin lo gizardino, and the Gemara adds in brachos, korin lo gizardino shel shivim shana, that if a person answers yehi shmei Rabba with all of his might, meaning not that you're screaming it on the top of your lungs, but you mamish have kavana when you say, may the name, the great name, be blessed forever and ever. You say that with real kavana, so then a evil decree that may have been made for you to endure for 70 years will be completely destroyed and abolished. Shenamar before Paros Yisrael b'hisnadev am baruchu Hashem. That when there is an exposure of sin among the Jewish people, then b'hisnadev am baruchu Hashem. When the nation donates their blessing of blessing Hashem. So my time of bifroa paraos mishum de baruchu Hashem. Why is it that there's a bifroa? Proa is to expose or to also to eliminate the sin. Why is it that the sin of the Jewish people is eliminated? It's because they bless Hashem properly. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yechon Afilu yesh bo shena shel avodah zara mochlin lo ksivhacha bifroa pros ksivhasam kifaruahu kifarao aharon. That the word bifroa also is an allusion to Avodah Zarah, because it says in the story of the Cheta Egel that Aaron saw that the people were parua, they were exposed as being idolaters, and therefore you see that even if a person has an aspect of idolatry within himself, and yet he still answers Yehi Shmei Rabba properly, he will also be forgiven for that sin as well. Amar Reish Lakish Kol Ha'ona Amin B'Chol Kocho Poschon Lo Shari Gan Eden. If a person answers Amen properly to a bracha, the gates of Gan Eden will be open for him. Shenamar Pischu Sha'arim V'Yovo Goy Tzadik Shomer Emunim. That open up the gates and let the righteous nation come in, that nation which is faithful in its guardianship. Al Tikri Shomer Emunim Ela Sha'omrim Amen. Do not read it as guarding their faithfulness, but rather those who answer Amen, because it's a play on words. My Amen, what does the word Amen actually convey? Amar Rabbi Chanina, Keil Melech Neman. It's an acrostic, it's an abbreviation for the words Keil Melech Neman, that God is the faithful king. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Berei Derav Shmuel Mishmei Derav, Ein Hadaleka Metzuya Ela B'Makom Sheyesh Chilul Shabbos. He said that fire breaks out in a community or in a private home when there was Chilul Shabbos. Shenamar V'im Lo Sishm'u Elai L'Kadesh Es Yom HaShabbos Ulevilti Se'es Masa. That the pasuk, I believe it's a pasuk in Yirmiyah, the pasuk says that if you don't listen to me, says Hashem, to sanctify the Sabbath properly, then what does the end of the pasuk say? V'hitzati eish b'sha'areha v'achla armanos Yerushalayim v'lo sichbeh. that I shall bring a fire in all of the gates, and they will consume the palaces of Jerusalem, and it will not be extinguished. So, my velo sichva, what does it mean it will not be extinguished? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak b'shah shein b'nei adam mitzvim l'chabosa. What it means is that the fire will cause the most damage because it'll break out at a time when the fire department is sleeping, when people are not available to put out the fire. Amar Rabbi Yerushalayim ela b'shvil shechilalu ba'as haShabbos. Jerusalem was only destroyed because people desecrated Shabbos. Now, of course, we have other places where it says that Jerusalem was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, or because of Avodah Zarah, Gilei Rais, and Shvichus Damim. So yeah, we take the Gemara in the proper context. But certainly, Chilul Shabbos contributed to the destruction of Yerushalayim. Shene'emar u'mishabsosai he'elimu eineihem ve'achel b'socham. As the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, that they hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and as a result, I shall begin in their midst to begin the destruction. Amar Rabbi Avahu lo charvi Yerushalayim ela b'shvil shebitlu kriya shema shachris v'arvis. Jerusalem was destroyed only because they stopped saying kriya shema in the morning and in the evening. Shene'emar hoi mashkimei baboker shechar yirdofu. That those who wake up in the morning, instead of doing the right thing and reciting Kriya Shema and davening, what do? They pursue beer. They start drinking. And it further says that they play musical instruments, they party, and they drink wine, and have a party, but they don't look at the work of Hashem, meaning they don't acknowledge Hashem in the recitation of Kriya Shema. And it says as a result, or is it mivaledas or mibelidas? Mibelidas. And therefore, my nation who are without knowledge shall go into exile. So you see that it's because they were more interested in partying than they were interested in acknowledging Hashem that they went into Golus. Amar Rav Hamnuna lo charva Yerushalayim ela b'shvil shebitlu batinakol shel beis Rabbi. He says that Yerushalayim was destroyed because they were lax in making sure that the children were in Cheder learning Torah. Shene'amar shfoch al olel bachutz v'goymer. Because this is now a pasuk in, again in Yirmiyah, and it says as follows. It says, Ve'eschamas Hashem molesi nil'esi hachil shfoch al olel bachutz ve'alsod bachurim yachdav ki gam ish im isha yilachdu zaken imolei yamim. That people will be trapped. Why? Because al olal bachutz. Ma tam shfoch mishum de olal bachutz. What is the reason why God's anger is vented upon the people? Because children are outside playing instead of inside the cheder learning Torah. Amar Ula lo charvi Yerushalayim ela b'bnei shelo lahem boishes panim. Ula says Yerushalayim was destroyed only because people didn't have a sense of shame from one another. People were not humble, and there was no sense of blushing or shamefulness from each other. Shene'emar hovishu kusoeva asu gambosh lo yevoshu. Like the pasuk continues, and it says in Yirmiyah that people are not embarrassed from each other. They're brazen. They're flagrantly brazen. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak lo charvi Yerushalayim ela b'shvil shehu shvu katan v'gadol. The reason Yerushalayim was destroyed is because there was no distinction between the elders and the youngers, or the more important and the less important, the Talmidei Chachamim and the Amaratzim. Shene'emar v'haya ka'am ka'kohen. Because it says that the Am Haaretz is no different from the Kohen, the distinguished member of society. V'chasiv basrei havok tavo ka'aretz. And it says afterwards, as a result, the land of Eretz Yisrael will be havok, which will mean will be emptied out. Amar of Amr Bereder Reb Shimon bar Abba. Amr Reb Shimon bar Abba, Amr Rabbi Chanina, L'charvi Yerushalayim ela b'shvil shelo hochichu zeh zeh. Jerusalem was destroyed because people neglected to give proper rebuke to each other. They just basically looked the other way. Shene'emar hayu sareha ke'elim lo matzu mir'eh. That is, it says that the officers of Jerusalem were like, it says in Eicha, they were like rams who cannot find fodder. Ma ayol zeh rosha shel zeh b'tzad znavo shel zeh af yisol shebo sa'ador kavshu p'neim b'karka v'lo chichu zeh zeh. The analogy to the ram is as follows. When rams are grazing in the field, one ram's head is facing the other ram's rear end. The point is they don't only look at each other face to face. People at that time could not look at each other in the face and say, "My dear Tyre Liyid, I think you're making a mistake, and you should really do it. You should do something different," because they didn't have the gumption, or they didn't really care. They didn't love each other enough to give proper hochacha. That's why Yerushalayim was destroyed. Amar Rav Yehuda lo charvi Yerushalayim ela bishvil shebizu ba talmidei chachamim. Yerushalayim was destroyed because they disparaged talmidei chachamim. They deprecated talmidei chachamim. Shenamar vayihiyu mal'ivim b'malachei ha'elokim, that they would insult the angels of God, ubozim devarav, and disparage His words, umisati im b'neviav ad alos chamas Hashem ba'amo ad le'ein mirpa, and they would make fun of, they would scoff at His prophets until God's wrath came against His nation that could no longer be healed. My ad le'ein mirpa, what does it mean it could no longer be healed? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav kol ha'mevazah talmid chacham ein lo refuah l'makasa. We see from this pasuk that if you insult a talmid chacham, then there is no cure for your ailments. Hashem will not allow the cure to work. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav mai dichsiv al tiga'u b'meshichai uvin v'yai al tareu. What is the pasuk? We say this in our davening in Psukei de Zimra. It says, "Do not touch my anointed ones, and do not do anything bad to my prophets." Al tigu b'meshichai elo tinoko shel beis rabban. This refers to small children. If they're learning in cheder, don't bother them. Don't take them away from their studies. That's what it means, do not touch my anointed ones, because sometimes you put oil in children's heads to make them fragrant and look nice. It's interesting, because when I was a yeshiva bacher many years ago, in Eretz Yisrael, you'd walk down Mea Sharm and you see the graffiti on the walls was Al Tiga'u b'Mashichai. Because at that time, I guess maybe it comes up again every few years, there was a movement in the government to compel all schools to have some kind of secular studies like math and language and things like that. And the Chadar in Mea Sharim, the Haredi community, was very much opposed to this. They said, Al Tigu b'Mashichai, don't take my children away from studying Torah. And that was like, so even the graffiti in Eretz Yisrael is Torah, right? Isn't that beautiful? Okay. Anyway, and when it says, do not do anything bad to my prophets, that means reference to Talmidei Chachamim, that they disparage Talmidei Chachamim. Amar Reish Lakish Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya Ein Ha'olam Miskayim Ela Bishvil Hevel Tinoko Shel Beis Rabban. The whole world subsists on the utterances of children who are studying Torah in Cheder. Amalei Rav Papa li Abaye Didach v'Didi Mai. So Rav Papa says to Abaye, so what are you and me? Chopped liver? In other words, what he was basically saying is like, why is their children's Torah study more important than your and my Torah study? We're so much more sophisticated in our erudition. So Amar Lei Eino Doma Hevel Sheyesh Bo Chet LaHevel She'ein Bo Chet. So he said a very profound answer. He says, our Torah learning may be on a higher level of scholarship, but you can't compare Torah study that is without sin to Torah study that is accompanied with sin. These innocent little babes who are saying words of Torah, there is nothing more precious to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than that. And therefore we have to do whatever we can to preserve that. Even when it comes time to build the temple, when Mashiach comes, we'll still tell the children, no, you have to stay in Cheder. You can't take away time from your Torah studies even to build the Beis HaMikdash. That Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I have a tradition from my ancestors, some say he said from your ancestors, that any city that does not have a cheder where children are studying Torah will eventually be destroyed. And Ravina Amar Machrivenosa, Ravina says not only will it be destroyed, it will be decimated, utterly destroyed, razed, R-A-Z-E-D, to the ground. And finally, the last thing we'll learn for today is Rava's statement. He says that Jerusalem was destroyed only because there were no longer any more faithful or truthful people left in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara is going to challenge that. First of all, the pasuk is Shenamar Shot to the Chutzos Yerushalayim Ureuna Udeu Ubakshu B'Rechovoseha Im Timtzu Ish Osa Mishpat Mevakesh Amuna Ve'es Lachla. He says, the pasuk says in and this is a pasuk in Yirmiyah. It says, go out into the streets of Yerushalayim. Seek out in the streets. Can you find a person who performs justice and seeks truthfulness or faithfulness? If you can find a truthful, honest, trustworthy person, I will forgive the city and I will not destroy it. And the fact that the city was eventually destroyed means that they couldn't find anyone who was honest and truthful. So the Gemara says, is this really so? There were no honest people? So V'ha'amar Rav Ketina afilu b'shas kishlanu Yerushalayim lo poskim mimenu anshe amana, that even at the time when Yerushalayim was being destroyed, there were still honest people there. Shenamar, and here's the pasuk to prove that point. Ki yitfos ish be'achiv beis aviv simla lecha katzin tiyalanu. So it's a very difficult pasuk to translate, but basically, literally, it means that when one man will take hold of his friend, from the house of his father, and he will say to him, Simla, garment, lecha katzin tihiyeh lanu, that you go and become a prince or a leader over us. So what does that pasuk mean? Devarim shebnei adam miskasin bahen kesimla yeshnan biyadecha, or yeshnain biyadecha. That a person will go over to someone that he regards as a Talmud Chacham, as a Rebbe, and he will say to him, I would like you to be my leader. I'd like you to be my Rebbe, my teacher. And the person will say Simla. He says no, because the person will be humble, and he will say, just like you cover your face when you're embarrassed with a garment, so too will this person say, I'm not worthy, and will cover himself with a garment, and will decline to become the teacher. And the pasuk continues and it says that that this stumbling block is in your, or beneath your hands, or in exchange of your hands. What does that mean? That a person will be told, he'll be approached, and he'll say, we want you to be our teacher, because you have experience. You've already stumbled a few times, you've made mistakes in the past, and you've learned from your past mistakes, and therefore you've got all of the experience and the knowledge, and we want you to be our Rebbe. So katzin tiyalanu, and you should become our leader, become our teacher, become our Rebbe, become our guide, become our mentor. So Yisa bayamahu leimor, the pasuk continues and it says that when a person is asked to become the leader, he shall take an oath on that day saying, Lo eheyeh chovesh, I shall not be the person who hides himself. So, etc. So what the Gemara explains what that means is as follows: Ein yisa elalashon shvu v'chein omer lo sisa shem elokech es shem Hashem. He says the word sisa, yisa bayamahu, means he will take an oath. As we know that the words lo sisa mean do not swear falsely. And what does this person swear? He says lo eheyeh chovesh, lo eheyeh michov she'atzma beveis hamedrash. He says, no, I'm not worthy of being your teacher, because I do not hide myself in the Beis Medrash to learn Torah properly. And then the pasuk continues and he says that in my house there is no bread and there is no garment. What that means is she'ein biyadi lo mikra v'lo mishnah v'lo gemara. And he says that no, I'm not worthy to become your mentor, to become your teacher, because I do not possess in my house the proper knowledge, because I haven't studied Tanakh properly, I haven't studied Mishnah properly, I haven't studied Gemara properly. So you see that this person is being very honest. So there was honesty in the times of the destruction of Yerushalayim. How can you say that Yerushalayim was destroyed because people weren't honest? Even during this period in history, people were quite honest. If someone were to be asked to become a Rebbe, he would respond and say, I don't possess sufficient knowledge to be a Rebbe. So frek the Gemara umimai. How do you know that that's the reason? Because people were honest. Dilma shiny hasam the amrluhu gamirna amrulei emalon emalon. So maybe the reason why a person was honest was simply because he didn't want to be caught in a lie. Because if a person says, after being asked to become the Rebbe, and he says, okay, I'll become your Rebbe, and then people are going to say, okay, now teach us, he's not going to have anything to say because he doesn't know anything. So maybe that's the reason why he's honest, but in things that he won't be caught in a lie, he wouldn't be honest. So the Gemara answers, Havalela Meimar, Gomar Vishachach. So, but he could have given an excuse that, you know what, I learned, but I forgot that Maseches. So come back tomorrow, we'll learn something else. So therefore, the fact that he's honest, despite that he would be able to avoid being caught as a liar, shows that there's honesty. So the Gemara says, you see that we have a question. There were honest people in Yerushalayim. How can you tell me there were no honest people? And for the Gemara, my lo eheyeh chovesh klal, my lo eheyeh klal. So therefore, he says, I'm not. This is part of the question. The Gemara says that when he says that I don't hide myself in the Beis Medrash, he's being honest. So the Gemara answers, lo kasha kan b'divrei Torah kan b'masa umatan. Answers the Gemara, no. The people were honest to deny the fact that they were Talmidei Chachamim. What they weren't honest in was when it came to business. Business is business. Religion's religion. Business is business. Right? When it comes to money, all bets are off. All religion goes out the window. We take off the yarmulke when we go to work. And therefore, people weren't honest back then. And that's what a pasuk means, that you couldn't find an honest businessman in the times of the Churban. So that's something that we have to be misakein if we want Mashiach to come. Should come to the Herod Yomim.